All right, right now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show, we are coming to you from the MIT office of Professor Noam Chomsky. Professor Chomsky is, of course, a famed linguist, an author, an advocate, a political activist. Professor Chomsky, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Glad to be with you.
So we are about 6 weeks away from the 2012 presidential election. I guess my first question is, do you personally see any value in activists, in progressives, focusing on national two-party politics and politicians?
I think they should spend 5 or 10 minutes on it, seeing if there's a point in taking part in the carefully orchestrated electoral extravaganza. And my own judgment, for what it's worth, is yes, there's a point to taking a part. There's taking part. Between the two choices that are presented, there's, I think, some significant differences. And like if I personally was in a swing state, I'd vote against Romney-Ryan, which means voting for Obama, because there's no other choice. I happen to be in a non-swing state, so I can either not vote or vote, as I probably will, for Jill Stein, Green candidate, in the hope that it might be the beginning of some genuine electoral alternative over time. But the main concern, but it really should be 10 minutes. It's just a matter of deciding, should I spend this little amount of time doing something which is not insignificant, but is not of great importance either. The main point is to try to keep working to change the society, the consciousness, the culture, so that we're not stuck with two options, both well to the right of actually even where most of the population is on most issues, but certainly where they ought to be.
So if someone has spent rightly, 10 minutes just to make sure that the worst of two options doesn't make it, especially, again, if you're in a swing state, what do you advise people to do? How do you advise people, activists, to spend their time and resources?
They should spend their time on resources, on education, on organization, on the choice of actions that are appropriate to the circumstances. There's no formula for this. So, for example, a year ago, if I'd been asked, let's say in August 2011, would it make any sense to have a sit-in Zuccotti Park, I would have said it's totally crazy, don't bother with it. One of the many cases where my tactical judgment was shown to be very much off base. Turned out to be a spectacular achievement. Tactics necessarily have a kind of half-life. You can't build a movement on tactics. They're valuable, in fact crucial, and this one was remarkably effective for something that by its nature could only last for a couple of months. But then you have to go and find other tactics that'll carry forward, and that's what I think activists ought to be doing. The electoral season in the United States, quadrennial extravaganza, typically tends to draw energy away from activism because people are caught up in the hoopla, excitement, and so on. So there's generally a kind of decline in activism, even in funding for activist organizations. But that'll be over, and then we have to get back to business. And you should be doing it right through as much as possible. So, for example, there's things that can be exploited about the kind of spectacle. People are focusing on some things, and one thing that can be brought out in discussion and meetings and demonstrations and so on is the huge gap between public opinion and public policy, and also what is meant by the very easily demonstrable fact that most people are so disillusioned with the political system that they do regard it as mostly a farce. Okay, first of all, why is that the case, and what can we do about it? These are things that can come to the fore in the glare of, advertising industry propaganda.
I think most people who listen to this show understand why it is, why that case actually is. Then what do you do about it? I guess it's the giant question, I suppose.
There's no single answer to what you do about it. So let's go back, say, 50 years and take a look at a little bit of modern history. The civil rights movement was a struggle that went back to the 18th century in many ways. It was very much alive in the 1930s, crushed, revived again, and so on. So now we're, say, 1960. What do you do about it? Well, a couple of kids in a black college at Greensboro, North Carolina, decided, well, what we do about it is sit in a lunch counter. Again, if you'd asked me, they wouldn't have done it, but fortunately they didn't ask me. But they sat in, and they're of course, arrested, brutalized. That could have been the end of it. Instead, other black students came the next day and continued. Pretty soon you had freedom buses, freedom riders, registration campaigns, freedom summer, a lot of white, mostly young people, not entirely going down. After a while, you had a major mass movement, which had partial success if you listen to the speeches in Martin Luther King Day, typically they end in 1963, when King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Well, King didn't stop his life at that point. He went on to things that he regarded as more important than even getting voting rights in the South, which was important. And he gave another "I Have a Dream" speech, which is rarely mentioned. It was in 1968, the day he was assassinated. He was there in Memphis to support a strike of sanitation workers, public service workers. And he was on his way to Washington. He was going to lead a march to Washington, which would be a step in organizing a political movement of the poor. He was dealing with class issues, and he was killed. The march went on anyway. His wife, Coretta King, led it, went through the places in the South where they'd had the major confrontations in Selma and so on. Ended up in Washington. They set up a tent city, Resurrection City. They kind of lasted a while, but pretty soon Congress, the most liberal Congress in American history, sent in the police. I think it's the middle of the night, and drove them out of the city. Smashed up the tent city and drove them out. And all of that rarely gets discussed. And the reason is it was, say for Northern liberals, it's easy to denounce racist sheriffs in Alabama. Boy, it makes us feel good, But when it gets to things that are close to home, like racism in the North, which is pretty extreme, or fundamental class issues, or in King's case, even criticism of the Vietnam War, which, contrary to mythology, was supported by Northern liberals. At that point, things kind of cut off. So was the civil rights movement a success? Well, by the standards of someone like, Andrew Sorkin in the New York Times a couple of days ago, the civil rights movement was a total failure.
Right.
It didn't break down the class structure, it didn't carry out a revolution, so it was a waste of time. But it's not the way social movements are. They can win partial successes. There are always also defeats. The defeats teach you something. They should. And you go on from there to the next peak. Activism is kind of like sometimes been compared with mountain climbing. If you're climbing a mountain, if you ever tried it, you know that you see a peak and you figure, okay, that's it. And you get to the peak and you discover that's not it. There's another peak much higher right up there, and then you got to go for that one. And that's what it's like. And a lot of the times you're kind of knocked down from the peak. Okay, and you learn from that and go on. And but there's no single answer. Going back to your question, in 1960 it turned out that a good answer was sitting in a lunch counter, but nobody could say, yeah, that's the right tactic. You do the things you can, and some of them light a spark, others don't. then you sort of go on from there.
Again, I'm talking to Professor Noam Chomsky. One of my things I mostly focus on my show is trying to bridge the gap between activists and the center-left that theoretically should be on the side, the center-left, what you consider center-left Democrats. Do you have any insight or thoughts on how do activists reach that specific population that is obviously a lot of them are in fear over the idea of, and rightfully so, the fear of what a Romney presidency and a Republican Congress would be, but are often way too dismissive when it comes to the atrocities that the Obama administration has done, that the Democratic Congress has done. How do you bridge that specific gap and reach that specific group of people? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Same way you try to reach anyone else, including ultra-right Republicans. Try to, any activist has to begin with a normal human sympathy. The people you're talking to are human beings. They're not devils. They may not disagree. They may disagree with you, but maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But and you have to approach them where they live, not somewhere else. So there's no point talking to the group you're talking about here. There's no point giving them a speech in Swahili, let's say. You have to ask, how do they perceive the world? And people perceive the world their own ways. And you have to try to suggest that there are other ways of perceiving the world. There's problems out here that you ought to look at. You ought to ask yourself whether the ways you're perceiving the world are the proper ways of dealing with these problems, and encourage people to think their way through these issues. That's activism. And there's no magic formula for it. It's different in different places and different times. I mean, sometimes the best form of activism is something very simple. Like suppose you go into say a downtown urban slum somewhere, and you're trying to organize people. For one thing, it's very hard to organize from the outside. There's no reason why anybody should pay any attention to you. What's that guy coming here for? But if you can be accepted as concerned with the community and part of it, and that's the main step, then it's much less of a problem with the kind of center-left people you're talking about, because we are part of that community, basically, recognizable part of it. But let's take that situation. I mean, people typically feel powerless. There's nothing we can do. The system is so powerful that anytime we lift our fingers, we're going to be crushed, so that's the end of it. Well, one important thing is to try to show that there are simple little things you can do. Like you can sit in a lunch counter. In a downtown slum in Boston, you can agitate to try to get a traffic light where the kids cross the street to school. And if you can succeed in doing small things, you get empowered. You say, look, it's not a rock that can't be moved. There are things we can do. And if there are things we can do, you can move on to other things. And you just have to find your way. Depends. There are no magic formulas. It's a matter of sensitivity, understanding, self-examination, self-criticism. Like maybe I'm wrong, I can learn from them too. And I'd say it's kind of like normal human relations, but with a goal in mind, a goal which could be modified in the course of the work. But if anybody's looking for formulas, nobody's presented them, because there aren't any. I mean, there are some ideas, like, Alinsky-style organizing or other proposals, and sometimes they work, sometimes they're right, sometimes they aren't. Mostly you improvise.
Earlier this year, you wrote a book on the Occupy movement. We recently just had the 1-year anniversary, and again, I'm talking to Professor Noam Chomsky. We just had the 1-year anniversary of the Occupy movement. I'm curious on your thoughts of the movement today, considering that for the most part, their encampments have been taken away, and the police have come and cracked down on them. What are your thoughts on the movement as it stands right now?
Well, as I said before, tactics have diminishing returns. You can't keep up with them forever. It just becomes a nuisance and pointless. So you have to move on. And the movement, to the extent that it's a movement, I mean, it's a very broad, varied group representing all sorts of parts of the population. And of course, it's not just here, it's international. I mean, I've given talks on Occupy movements in Sydney, Australia, and Europe, and so on. It spread like wildfire. And there are different problems in different places, and you have to figure out ways to address them. The main problem is, how do you engage broader sectors of the population in actions that will advance often quite common general goals, maybe different specific ones, but general common ones, and there are plenty of them, like the kind of virtual criminality of the financial system, the shredding of and disappearance of meaningful functional democracy, the scandalous nature of the health system, which is a total disaster. Point by point, there are a lot of things that can be done. Try to, there's enormous propaganda attempting to get people to focus attention on a minor problem, namely the deficit. It's a problem, but not major. And to avoid looking at the obviously major problem, namely joblessness. And so I think most people kind of understand that. Public opinion polls show that people regard jobs as the main problem. It's true that concern over the deficit has increased, but I suspect that's a function of propaganda, because there isn't. I mean, like you look at the media, that's the only problem. It's supposed to. So I think you can move out to break through that and say, look, that's not the problem. The problem's joblessness, and the problem is very concrete. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to look around the society and say, look, something's going wrong. There's a huge mass of people who want to work. There's an enormous amount of work that has to be done. There are plenty of resources. It's the richest country in the world. And for some reason, those things can't be put together. Well, that tells you there's something deeply pathological about the general socioeconomic system. Well, okay, what's pathological about it? That's what I think people ought to be asked to confront. That includes the center-left educated segments you're talking about.
Are there other activist groups that you find personally inspiring, that you see that are doing consistently good work today? Are there other ones? I mean, the Occupy movement is evolving, obviously, with the realities that they're facing, but are there other activist groups that you see right now that you think this is something that other groups could perhaps be inspired by and learn from?
Oh, there are lots of them. I think if you counted noses, there's more activism today than there was at the peak of the 1960s, the last couple of years of the 1960s. By now, there's activist movements on all sorts of topics, some of them really of critical significance, like the environmental movement. So, for example, if you you read the New York Times the last couple of days, front page articles discovering that the Arctic ice has receded much more rapidly than even the most grim forecasts of scientific computer modeling. And the same articles say that the government and the corporations are reacting by trying to make the problem worse. That's not what they say. But what they say is they're reacting by looking at the exciting prospects of drilling in the Arctic so you can get more fossil fuels and therefore make the Arctic ice recede even faster. So instead of having a disaster in 50 years, maybe we can have it in 20 years. Right. And that's all together in the same articles. Well, there are movements working on that. That's a matter of survival.
Yeah.
And there are very good movements working on it. We happen to be very atomized in this country, so there's no core activist movement. Part of the reason for that is the success, the great right-wing success in undermining the labor movement. The labor movement historically was always in the center of any major successful activist movement, not the whole labor movement, at least parts of it. There's been a huge business-led struggle since the 1940s to destroy the labor movement, which terrified them in the 1930s. It was just too progressive and too activist. And it started right after the war, Taft-Hartley Act, and it's gone right on till today, and it's been pretty successful. It's also been successful ideologically. So people have been kind of induced to hate and public service workers who happen to have union granted pensions. Like, why do they have a pension and I don't? That's been very good propaganda. I mean, the reason they have a pension and you don't is because they had unions and you don't. And they gave up wages. They're being underpaid relative to their skill levels. And the compensation was, well, they got some security. So you don't attack them because they won some security by giving up wages. You ask, what's responsible for your plight? Like, banks, employers, CEOs, don't let them divert you to this. But the diversion has been pretty successful. So, for example, in the Wisconsin election, a substantial number of union voters voted for Wallace. You look back at the 2010 election here in Massachusetts, replacing Kennedy's seat, probably a majority of union voters voted for Brown, partly because they were so disillusioned with the way the Obama administration gave up on, actually worse than gave up, it destroyed every promise it had made to them when they'd worked hard, and there was plenty of disillusionment. But these, with the loss, substantial, not total, but substantial loss of the labor movement, what you find is very fragmented activism. But a lot of it is pretty significant. The environmental movement is one case. One case that's not discussed as much as it should be, in my opinion, is the kind of work that Garl Perovitz has been spearheading in Washington. You've probably had him on, but the movement around Ohio mostly, but elsewhere too, to develop a community and worker-owned enterprises. That's very feasible, and it strikes right at the heart of the socioeconomic system, but it's tolerated by power. It does fit within market systems, acceptable markets. You got conservative legislators supporting it and so on. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, why should a couple of bankers in New York decide to destroy a factory in Ohio and send it to Bangladesh or somewhere? Why should they have the right even to make the decision? None of their business, just because they happen to own stock. It's the business of the stakeholders, the community and the workforce. And people can understand that, and there's a lot can be done. And that could be done on a large scale if people were organized. So take, say, the auto industry. A couple of years ago, the government virtually owned it. Still does own a lot of it. It had been effectively nationalized. Well, there were a couple of things that could have been done. One is what was done. Reconstruct it and give it back to essentially the same owners and managers, maybe a couple of different names, but then go on with what it had been doing. There were other possibilities. It could have been given over to the workforce and the communities, and it could have been helped to develop things that the country really needs badly, like high-speed rail. The workers have the skills, the country has the need, there's plenty of resources. It would change things enormously. Well, in order to do that, you'd have to have what's going on around Cleveland at a much higher level. But that just means you can achieve it with more work and more organizing. And that's an important activist movement. There's plenty of others. Prison, the American prison system is another huge scandal. There's prisoner rights movements. There's significant issues about immigration. In fact, there are plenty of foreign policy issues. We could be heading into a major war in the Middle East, which is completely avoidable. Easy methods of avoiding it. Press doesn't report them. Nobody discusses them except in maybe professional arms control journals. But just to mention the obvious, whatever threat you think Iran poses, mostly hyped, but whatever threat it is, could be mitigated, mainly ended, by a method that has overwhelming international support. Overwhelming. Move to establish a nuclear weapons-free zone in the region. There's actually a conference coming up in December which will deal with this. It's been on the international agenda for almost 20 years. The U.S. kind of formally accepts it, but in fact it rejects it. All kind of conditions. Obama's imposed all kind of. Bush just said, "The hell with it. We're not looking at it." The Obama administration a little more forthcoming. They say, "Yeah, we're looking at it. It's a great idea, but we can't do it. Not now. Maybe someday." And Israel has to be excluded. In fact, just 2 days ago, Israel announced that it's not participating in the conference because it doesn't want to be. It would be coerced into doing it. Actually, it's interesting that a majority of the population in Israel is in favor of it, but Israel's not a democratic society anymore than we are. Well, this is major news. I don't know about you. I couldn't find it anywhere, but unless there's substantial popular pressure to get the U.S. to end its rejectionist stand on this policy of blocking it, conference won't get anywhere. And we may march on, or maybe by then already will have marched on to a major war, which would be extremely destructive. It's something that can be done. In fact, everywhere you look, there's endless things that can be done. But you got to do them. And that requires, no magic, learning about things, breaking through the doctrinal barriers, even the information barriers, which is not impossible, and moving on to education, organizing, whatever activism is appropriate. You just got to feel your way.
Again, I'm talking to Professor Noam Chomsky. We're almost out of time. Before I let you go, I guess my last question is, is there anything specific that gives you hope as someone who has devoted decades to activism? As someone who has seen victories and defeats, and again, it's as many victories, there's as many defeats and more defeats in a lot of ways. Is there stuff today that still gives you hope as an activist?
A number of things. For one thing, the kind of inspiring, exciting image of people struggling under really harsh conditions, incomparably worse than anything we face, and going on courageously, honorably, and not giving up. That just is inspiring, and they're all over here and in other countries. Another thing is just if you look over the long-term trajectory, it's basically positive. Over time, the rights have been expanded, deepened, intensified. New issues come up which weren't even talked about before. Many victories have been, even in recent years, won enough so you hardly have to struggle about them. So take, say, women's rights, probably the major achievement of the 60s and post-60s movement, which really civilized society. I mean, that struggle goes back to the 18th century, and it did take off, made a big move forward in the 1960s. It hasn't, plenty of ways to go, but a lot of victories changed the society a lot. A lot of things you don't have to fight about there because they're now accepted. Or again, say, take the environmental movement. It didn't exist in the 1960s, so there was no movement. It began around Earth Day, sort of been picking up. Now it's substantial. Problems are now recognized in ways they weren't then. So there's a lot of success. But I think the basic reason is just very simple. You have two choices. You can say, look, everything's hopeless, so I'm not going to do anything, and help guarantee that the worst will happen. Or you can say, well, things are tough, but they've been worse before, and if we get engaged, maybe we can carry things forward. And between those two choices, there's no real choice.
Professor Noam Chomsky, thank you for your decades of activism and work. It's been an honor to be able to meet you and talk with you. Thank you so much, and thank you for being on the show.
Glad to be with you again. Yeah.